Yes, hello. I'm speaking to you sweaty after having listened in my yard with great interest to each of your presentations. I'm speaking from Quandamooka country in what is Redland City, and where I am actually a local councillor, and I find myself an elected representative who is not part of the majority, but I find myself very much aligned with NENA values of ecological sustainability, and resonating back to the first presentation, the social, economic, environmental and cultural are all fundamental to democracy, I believe. Theon, your presentation and proposal at the end, I believe, is absolutely critical. I think in the state of Queensland, where I am, there's been so many issues recently with the state government looking at challenges in the local government realm. I think things have gone a bit too far. Neoliberalism is very much the dominant paradigm, but the will of the elected representatives is where change needs to take place. And I'm not sure that there's definitely will in the community, but I think we've moved over the last decade away from community development approach. In the state of Queensland, 8 years, actually 10 years ago, the state government required community plans to be developed from a bottom-up participative process to ensure public funds were spent in the right direction. The city where I live got it really, they did 3,000 members of the community designed their own plans supported by councillors and officers. And it was done so well that it raised the expectations for across Queensland having to do the same thing. And when Campbell Newman was elected, he removed community plans as a 20-year strategic vision and just left it with corporate plans. And we are very much aligning around the corporate plan focus at the moment. So my question is, how can all of those values that are being presented by the other speakers on the ground with a citizen-led, participative, bottom-up value proposition meet the top down from the inside out and the outside in? A 20-second answer would be perfect.
Thank you, Paul. Well framed. Yeah, do any of the presenters want to respond to that? If you just raise your hand. Comment. Yep, you go, Theon.
Oh, thank you. I'll just say, look, I think it's, very interesting what you've said and interesting examples you've given. I think there is a disjuncture or a mismatch between what people are interested in communities, in many cases, and what our community representatives, elected politicians, local, state, and so on, are actually doing and delivering. And I think to close that gap, it's about organising, coming together, developing and expressing the things that we want and prefer, the approaches that we want and prefer, and pushing that through, up, if you like, through to those representatives. I don't think there's really any substitute for that. You've got to get organised, you've got to be vocal, stand up, get the voice out there, get the message out there.
I'd like to speak to that too, if I could. Great question, Paul. How can we do it? And I think that people just lack imagination or any understanding. I think neoliberalism is so ingrained in everyone, it's invisible. We just assume it's the only way to be. And that's why when we see a new model, like two presented today by Christine and by Eileen and me, and the ones that were mentioned too by Theon, when a new model is shown, then people go, oh, that's fascinating. And I think these models need to be demonstrated and taught to local communities and to constituents everywhere so they can see, oh, there might be a different way of organising things, and that they will be stimulated to get involved because they see that a different outcome could be achieved where all voices count.
Thank you, Raphael. Christine, you wanted to make a comment as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Paul, for the question. The seed generator of what is now Syntropic, Enterprise Syntropic World was Big Blue Sky, which was an event that we held in the local Gold Coast community. And, but I want to make a couple of, obviously we learned a lot from that. We did it 2 years in a row, and it was sponsored by council, but I wanted to, and state government, but I wanted to make a comment about that because one of the things that is profoundly missing from grassroots is a really robust form of sense making. So it's not just decision making, it's sense making, and giving people the opportunity to experience and be exposed to, because at the moment, unless you are literally off the internet and off technology, our interiors have been colonized, and whether you like it or not, that's what's happening. And so there is many models of different forms of participatory democracy and so on, but a groundwork of that must include, and this goes back to education and so on, a deep inquiry of sense making, number one, and number two, using technologies such as Nora Bateson's warm data, which enables people to live in trans-contextual conversations. You know, those type of things are really critical.
Thank you so much. Oh, I was just gonna, Eileen, I think also wanted to respond. Yeah.
Yeah, not just Paul. As Raphael said, I think it's just a matter of trying things out. In sociocracy, which is the governance model that we're using at the Eco Village, I've got this saying, it's good enough for now, it's safe enough to try. And that's, we keep on coming back to that idea at the Eco Village. We're very applied in our thinking. I think that's the beauty of this Eco Village. We try it, no, it hasn't worked, let's tinker with it, and in so doing, we change the way we think. And it's like an experiment, it's experimentation for me. And there's always an opportunity, as I say in sociocracy, scrap it. If the idea didn't work, think of something else.
Great message, Eileen. Paul, did you want to respond?
Interestingly, I agree absolutely. Trying things out is so important. The irony is that over the last decade, globally, so much community work with transition towns, with permaculture, with so many fantastic things, with the whole notion of social enterprise and the commons, and all of this has been taking place, donut economics, sociocracy, NENA, and yet the complexity involved, because it's ecological, it's systems-based, there are many moving parts. And the difficulty for residents is, as things have become more simplified and binary and delivered on tap through a digital simple solution, the complexity has gone up. So trying to get residents in local communities to come together in real time to test these things out and explore for themselves which ones work. There's a double thing that's happened. There's so much more access to information, but so a much lower collective consciousness of practicing being in each other's company. So that's just an interesting irony. I'm just acknowledging that and grateful for all that's been said. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Eileen, you do have a question, but were you just about to respond then to Paul, which you're welcome to do?
You saw me take a deep breath. Yes, I was just thinking, you're right, Paul. We're experimenting with lots of things. We're also finding at the Eco Village, we're doing it mostly on a voluntary basis. So a lot of the work that we're doing is voluntary, and we're getting a little bit burnt out. But there's always the ability of pulling back. We've got all these little sayings at this Eco Village, and you say it's like the geese flying, and usually there's one goose that's up the front and everyone else follows, and they honk, honk, honk and support the person up the front. But there are moments where that goose gets so tired that they have to pull back and another goose has to come forward. So I think we have to acknowledge this. Volunteers do get tired. So, and that's why I was a little bit intrigued in Christine's comment that she had come across this model where people fall into a human heap, and I'm very intrigued in your model, Christine, but through these syntropic events, you notice that those human problems dissolve, if I understood you correctly. I wouldn't mind your comments on that, Christine.
Yeah, so the messy human heap is, and this is part of, and so yeah, the model that we use, the models, because there's lots of them within Syntropic World, and that we teach in the masterclass and so on. As I said, they're all completely grounded in the laws of universe, laws of nature. So that, but also, as Bucky would say, argue with the model. So build the model, argue with the model. Number one, but number two, any human endeavor, and please everybody, you're welcome, instead of social enterprise, if you're in advance on a social enterprise, use the word syntropic enterprise. I welcome as many people using it as possible, because we need to change the way we think about how we do enterprise, which is why we came up with a name that reflected that, rather than have it be something that sort of fits the old thing. But any human enterprise where you have people coming together around a central purpose that they care about, whether they're volunteers or people that are being paid in whatever form that they're being paid, needs to have some form of threshold crossing architecture that says, if you want to be an active participant of this, then this is how we engage with each other. This is how we do things together. If we don't have that, and one of the principles that I teach in the masterclass is the principle of minimum system and universe, which is the tetrahedron. So this is again geometry, but integrity means to hold its shape. And so if we don't have something that enables people to hold the shape of their own individual integrity, number one, so that it can show up in their wholeness, but number two, so that they can work around the integrity of the idea that they're animating, keeping the integrity of the idea they're animating. Because the moment we overlay an old model, one of the old paradigm tools that the human constructed onto a brilliant idea, it doesn't matter how beautiful the human is, how genius they are, how beautiful the collective wisdom is, that idea is going to be contaminated, the integrity is going to be eroded, and we cannot reach escape velocity to go to the next level of transformation about how humans need to do things. And so where there is a pushback to a large degree is particularly because of different levels of human development in our current sort of thinking, people who are environmentalists and so on, they abhor any form of rules, regulations, agreements, hierarchy. We're not talking about bossy hierarchy. We're talking about, we use stewardship as the profound model, but akin to the cell membrane. And so it's a spherical holding pattern that breathes rather than being top down. But people need to say, I want to be a part of this. And by being part of this, I'm going to commit to being a group with this community by honouring these sets of rules and principles of how we do things, which is not fixed in stone, because everything needs to be emergent, dynamic, active, and continually in an autopoietic cycle. I don't know whether I answered your question, but there's really complex thinking behind this work, but it works, and people are building these type of enterprises as we speak.
What rings a bell is when you say we have to change the way we think. It's esoteric.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Raphael or Fionn, did you want to build on that topic at all?
I'd like to ask Christine a question, actually. Your model sounds absolutely fascinating, Christine, and it's always so great to be able to see real life examples. And I'm wondering if some of the companies or organizations using syntropic enterprise, if we can find out where they are so we can learn from them about their actual application.
Yeah. And is it Raphael that's asking the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, it is, Christine.
Yeah. And so a couple of things. There are, so just the, Big Blue Sky, obviously, that we held on the Gold Coast, that was a living, breathing sort of like prototype of what we're doing. We now have, as I said, there's about 10 businesses that are really actively engaged in the deployment of all of the sort of principles to become syntropic. There are a couple of what we call exemplars in the world at the moment that are, and so just so I'm really clear, we hold a really grace space around this model, and because we're not holding out for perfection, but we're holding out for very committed action with demonstratable, publicly stakeholder demonstrated action towards the plan that you're moving. Patagonia would be one of the examples of an enterprise that has deployed Syntropy over a period of time. The local company, Gold Coast Outland Denim, we work quite closely with them. I don't know whether you've heard of them. Amazing company, ending slavery. There's a company in the UK called Planetary World. And there's a whole bunch of other companies, but if you go to the website, you'll be able to see on the homepage some of the companies. But we are very definitely a community of practice. So part of what we're doing is building and tracking, doing the case studies, supporting each other, etc., etc. It's very practical, very grounded.
Thank you, Christine. So we're at our time now. I would like to thank Christine, Raphael, Eileen, and Fionn so very warmly. And in any way that you like, be it a reaction or turning on your camera and giving them a big clap and a wave, let's all say thank you so very much. And we, the presenters and speakers, also say a big thank you back to wonderful participants and great questions. So the next session is going to be equally fascinating. So it's plenary session for reinventing work for a generative economy. And I think there's a lot that overlaps with what we've been talking about here. So please do join it, but you've got time for a nice break to go and rejuvenate yourselves before you come back in. So thank you for being here.